Episode 63 of the Henry George Daily Devotional. We are dealing with the fifth insufficient remedy, currently advocated for in 1879 when this book was written, but is still advocated for by many folks today, to explain why there are recessions. This remedy is titled From Governmental Direction and Interference. I call it, what about rent control? I think that's what this chapter, or whatever section of the book, is about. George writes, the limits within which I wish to keep this book will not permit so there is a limit, Mr. Henry George. Go on forever if you ask me. Will not permit an examination in detail of the methods in which it is proposed to mitigate or extirpate poverty by governmental regulation of industry and accumulation, and which in their most thoroughgoing form are called socialistic. By now we have learned the meaning of extirpate, but it never hurts to do a little Googling to root out and completely destroy, or destroy completely. Alright, we're dealing with them socialists today. Listen up. Nor is it necessary for the same defects attached to them all. There are the substitution of governmental direction for the play of individual action, and the attempt to secure by restriction what can better be secured by freedom. As to the truths that are involved in socialistic ideas, I shall have something to say hereafter. But it is evident that whatever savors of regulation and restrictions is in itself bad, and should not be resorted to if any other mode of accomplishing the same end presents itself. Alright, so we're saying that if we can do the same thing without regulation and restriction, we're just going to say it's evident that it's bad to then do regulation and restriction. Alright, I'm with you, but I could see some people being not so sure there. For instance, George says, to take one of the simplest and mildest of the class of measures I refer to, a graduated tax on incomes. That's funny. I don't even remember him talking about this subject, considering, what's the word? There were no income taxes at his time. He was mostly upset about tariffs, which acted basically like a sales tax, uh, as well as property taxes, and I don't, maybe a stamp tax. I don't know. The object at which it aims, the graduated tax on incomes, the reduction or prevention of immense concentrations of wealth, is good. Uh, I always wanna be nitpicky about this. Like, it's the concentration bit, I guess, that's bad, but like you could assume if the if that wealth is like gotten fairly, which is like basically impossible for us to imagine any concentration of wealth, any like famous family, any famous man pretty much only got their wealth by exploiting super cheap labor because we live in a land monopolized world, as well as most likely most businesses are somehow fundamentally granted artificial monopoly or land monopoly, patents, or uh, land. So I don't know if I agree that just preventing concentrations. Anyway, we keep going. This means um, involves the employment of a large number of officials clothed with inquisitorial powers, temptations to bribery and perjury, and all other means of evasion, which beget a demoralization of opinion and put a premium upon unscrupulousness and a tax upon conscience. And finally, just in proportion as the tax accomplishes its effect, a lessening in the incentive to the accumulation of wealth, which is one of the strong forces of industrial progress. So, yeah, he's addressing this in two forms. Uh, any form of government oversight involves some sort of cost of transaction, you could say, which is temptations of bribery and perjury, means of evasion, um, and that begets a demoralization of opinion, which, we have a whole bunch of people who aren't crazy, big fans of our government. In fact, that is sort of the default view, it seems like, in our present day. Um, and then finally, even if it does achieve what it is aiming for, in this case, the more successful it is in reducing these concentrations of wealth, the more it lessens the incentive to accumulate wealth. That's why I push back against ever even having just the simple goal of reducing concentrations of wealth. I mean, maybe the immenseness bit, I suppose, um, but really, yeah. I don't know. This is why, sometimes when you talk to people about Georgism, I've had some people say we should just have a 100% inheritance tax. And that, if I work really hard all day today and come home and I have a bunch of food and toys and games or whatever, um, for my kid and for me, and then I die tomorrow, and I knew I was gonna die tomorrow or something. If I knew I was gonna die in a week or something, and I had a little baby and no other parent or something, but somehow I had I had I had childcare somehow, uh, and I knew when I died that baby was gonna get nothing. I would probably spend my week accumulating a bunch of wealth for that baby before I died in a week, and want them to have it. The trouble is when we think of inheritance and big estates and big inheritances, it's bundled in that those inheritances are largely unjustly gotten. If they're giant, accumulations of land, indeed they are unjustly gotten. Of course, people will say, okay, maybe not 100% inheritance tax. You got to set the line somewhere. But these things scale. If it's anyway, you're here for George. Um, while, if the elaborate schemes for regulating everything and finding a place for everybody could be carried out, we should have a state of society resembling that of ancient Peru. Don't know about that. Or that which, to their eternal honor, the Jesuits instituted and so long maintained in Paraguay. Don't know the history of either of those. I will not say that such a state as this is not a better social state than that to which we now seem to be tending. Yeah, so maybe socialism is better than our current form of capitalism, one might say. For in ancient Peru, though production went on under the greatest disadvantages from the want of iron and the domestic animals, yet there was no such thing as want, and the people went to their work with songs. I don't know anything. I don't remember reading this, and I don't know anything about. Oh, you know what we messed up again today? A couple days ago, I started with Remedy 3, and I never completed Remedy 2. We might have to double back if we remember at the end. George continues, but this it is unnecessary to discuss, that Peru didn't have iron or animals. Socialism in anything approaching such a form, modern society cannot successfully attempt. The only force that has ever proved competent for it, a strong and definite religious faith, is wanting and is daily growing less. Oh, he says socialists should be more religious, but in our modern 20th and 21st century perspective, socialists have been pretty non-religious, I might say. We have passed out of the socialism of the tribal state and cannot re-enter it again except by a retrogression that would involve anarchy and perhaps barbarism. It's quite an assertion. Our governments, as is already plainly evident, would break down in the attempt. Instead of an intelligent award of duties and earnings, we should have a Roman distribution of Sicilian corn, and the demagogue would soon become the imperator. The ideal of socialism is grand and noble, and it is, I am convinced, possible of realization, But such a state of society cannot be manufactured. It must grow. Society is an organism, not a machine. It can live only by the individual life of its parts, and in the free and natural development of all the parts will be secured the harmony of the whole. All that is necessary to social regeneration is included in the motto of those Russian patriots, sometimes called nihilists: land and liberty. You know, maybe I go back to chapter 2 uh, on its. Oh, here's chapter 2. We're done with all the remedies after the next section. I didn't mean go back to chapter 2. I meant go back to remedy 2 and finish that uh, as an episode all on its own. All right. Like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, be my friend. Bye bye.